Outside, the rain poured. Keanu stepped into Sandra's home. The night was alive with the sound of rain. Water beat against the windows, running in heavy streams across the glass as thunder rolled far away. The world outside looked blurred, almost like a painting being washed by nature's hand. Inside her home, Sandra sat on the edge of the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. She wasn't afraid of storms, not really, but tonight the storm matched the one inside her heart. Her house felt quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak in the woods seem louder. She had left the lights dimmed, only a single lamp glowing, as though she wanted to hide from the world. She had been carrying the weight of exhaustion and loneliness for too long, pretending to smile in public but feeling broken when alone. The storm outside seemed to press against her, reminding her that she could not escape her own thoughts. Then came the sound, soft at first, then firmer. A knock at the door. Sandra froze, her heart racing. At this hour, in this storm, who could it be? The knocking came again, steady, not urgent but certain. With hesitant steps she rose, her bare feet pressing against the wooden floor. As she pulled the door open, the rain seemed to rush into her space, and standing there was Keanu. Soaked from head to toe, his dark hair clinging to his face, his black coat heavy with water, he looked like someone who had fought against the storm to reach her. "You should be inside," she said softly, almost whispering as if her voice might break the fragile moment. Keanu's eyes, calm yet full of unspoken emotion, met hers. "I couldn't stay away," he answered, his voice steady but low, carrying the weight of truth. The rain poured harder, but the sound faded in Sandra's ears. For a moment, all she heard was her own heartbeat and the steady calm in Keanu's tone. She stepped aside, allowing him in. As he entered, leaving behind the storm, it felt as though a piece of light had entered her darkened home. He removed his coat, shaking off droplets of rain, and Sandra fetched a towel without thinking. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it to him, and when his fingers brushed hers, the touch lingered. It wasn't dramatic or forceful, just gentle, respectful, and filled with unspoken kindness. They sat together in the living room, the storm still loud outside, but inside there was a quiet warmth growing between them. Sandra tried to mask her weariness, but Keanu saw through it. He always had. He leaned forward, his voice soft but certain. "I know you've been trying to carry too much," he said. "You don't always have to be strong on your own." Her eyes filled with tears, unbidden, but she didn't look away. In that moment, she felt seen, truly seen, and it was both terrifying and healing. She had spent so long hiding her weakness, yet here was someone who didn't judge her for it. Keanu didn't try to fix everything with quick words. He didn't give false promises. He simply stayed there with her, his presence calm and grounding. The rain beat on. Thunder echoed. But somehow the storm outside felt less powerful than the connection growing inside her home. For Sandra, this was the beginning of something unexpected. A night that started with darkness and storm had opened into a moment of quiet truth. She had no idea what would follow, no idea of the twists, the conflicts, and the emotions that would come. But she knew one thing with certainty. Keanu stepping into her home that night would change everything. The storm raged on outside, but inside the house time seemed to move differently. Sandra sat across from Keanu, still trying to steady her breath. She had not expected him tonight, not after weeks of silence. Yet here he was, dripping rainwater on her rug, looking at her with the same quiet steadiness that had once comforted her through the hardest days. She wanted to ask why he had come. She wanted to demand answers about his sudden distance, about the way he had pulled back when she had needed him most. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with the ache she had kept hidden. Keanu was the first to break the silence. "I know I should have come sooner," he said, his voice low, almost blending with the sound of the storm. "But tonight, when I heard the rain, I couldn't stay away. I felt like you needed someone here." His words struck her heart with an almost painful truth. She had needed someone. She had been drowning in loneliness, covering it with work and forced smiles. Hearing him speak it out loud made her feel exposed, yet strangely safe. "You left without saying much," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't understand. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong." Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face lit softly by the lamp's glow. His expression was filled with something between regret and tenderness. "You didn't do anything wrong, Sandra. It was me. I thought keeping distance would protect us both. But I see now. It only hurt you, and it hurt me too." A long pause followed. Outside, the rain kept pounding. Thunder rolled again. But inside, their silence felt heavier than the storm. Sandra looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "You've always been kind," she said softly. "You've always been the one who gives without expecting. But kindness can feel like a gift and a curse. Sometimes it makes me wonder if you ever let yourself take anything in return." Keanu gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe I don't know how to. Maybe I've spent too long being strong for others. But when I'm with you, I feel lighter. You remind me it's okay to be human. It's okay to be vulnerable." Her chest tightened, her emotions swelling. She had wanted answers, and now she was getting them. But with each word came a deeper pull at her heart. She wasn't just hearing Keanu's truth, she was realizing her own. Suddenly, a flash of lightning cut across the room, and the lights flickered, then went out completely. The house was swallowed in darkness. Sandra let out a sharp breath, startled, but before fear could take hold, she felt Keanu's hand reach across the small table between them. His fingers closed gently over hers, steady and warm in the dark. "It's just the power," he said calmly. "The storm's strong, but it will pass." His hand lingered, holding hers longer than needed, and in the dark, their connection felt even more real. She squeezed back, not wanting to let go. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," Sandra whispered, her voice trembling in the darkness. "But right now, I don't want to be alone anymore." Keanu's hand tightened slightly, reassuring her. "Then you won't be," he said. "Not tonight, not while I'm here." The storm roared louder outside, but in the dark living room, a new kind of silence filled the air, one that was not empty but alive, filled with unspoken promises and fragile hope. The storm outside had grown calmer by dawn, but inside Sandra's house the air was heavy with everything left unsaid. She had barely slept. Even with Keanu sitting quietly in the chair across from her through the night, her thoughts spun in circles. Every memory of their past, every wound of silence, every moment of kindness, they all tangled together, leaving her restless. When the first pale light of morning slipped through the curtains, Sandra rose from the couch. Her body ached from hours of stillness, but her heart ached more. She walked to the window, pulling the fabric aside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the world outside glistening as if washed clean. Behind her, Keanu stirred. "Morning," he said gently, his voice still carrying the quiet calm that had soothed her during the night. She turned, meeting his eyes. "Morning," she echoed, though her tone was heavier. A silence settled again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was thick, almost demanding that someone break it. Sandra finally exhaled. "Why did you really come last night, Keanu? It can't just be the storm. You've been gone for weeks, and then suddenly you appear at my door in the middle of the night." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his gaze steady but filled with shadows. "Because I realized something, Sandra. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I thought you'd be better off without me, without my chaos. But every day I stayed away, I felt the distance grow like a wall. And when the storm came last night, I knew I couldn't stand behind that wall anymore." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let the warmth of his words in, but part of her heart still carried doubt. "You make it sound simple," she said softly, "but it isn't simple. You left me wondering if I mattered. You left me feeling like I was asking for too much just by wanting you here." Keanu rose from his chair, taking slow steps toward her. His presence filled the small space, not with pressure, but with something steady. "You do matter," he said firmly, "more than you know, and I should have shown you that every day instead of running from it." Sandra's throat tightened, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She wanted to believe, but belief was fragile when trust had cracks. "Then show me now," she whispered, almost as if daring him. Without hesitation, Keanu stepped closer. He didn't reach for her quickly, didn't force the moment. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly, giving her space to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand brushed against her cheek, warm against her cold skin. The touch was gentle, reverent, almost apologetic. Her tears slipped free then, running over his fingers. "I don't want promises you can't keep," she said, her voice shaking. "Then I won't promise," he replied softly. "I'll just be here, and if I fail, I'll stand up again. Because you're worth fighting for, Sandra." For a moment, all she could do was close her eyes and lean into the touch. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something stronger than anger. It was the beginning of trust rebuilding itself. But just as the warmth of the moment began to settle, the sudden buzz of her phone on the table shattered it. Sandra stepped back, wiping at her face quickly. She grabbed the phone, glancing at the screen, and her expression shifted, fear flashing across her features. Keanu noticed instantly. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she held the phone. "It's from the studio," she whispered. "They're threatening to cut me from the project if I don't show up today. They think I've lost focus, that I'm unreliable." Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of weeks of pressure pressing down. Keanu stepped closer again, his tone steady. "Then you won't face it alone. I'll go with you." She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You'd do that?" "I'm here now," he said firmly, "and I'm not walking away again." The drizzle had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with gray. Sandra sat at the small kitchen table, her untouched cup of coffee cooling in front of her. Keanu stood near the counter, his posture calm but his eyes watching her closely. Neither spoke for a while. Both weighed down by the call from the studio and what it meant. Sandra finally broke the silence. "They don't trust me anymore," she whispered. "They think I'm distracted, unstable. Maybe they're right." Keanu's brows furrowed. "They're not right. You're one of the strongest people I know. But even strong people stumble. That doesn't mean you've lost your worth." She shook her head, frustration leaking into her voice. "You don't understand. In this business, one stumble is all it takes. They're already circling, waiting for me to fall so they can replace me. I've worked my whole life to be respected, and now it feels like everything is slipping through my hands." Keanu pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, leaning forward so his eyes met hers. "I do understand," he said quietly. "I've been there. I felt the world questioning my place, my worth. I felt the silence when people stop believing in you. And I know what it feels like to think you're standing alone." His words carried a weight that made Sandra's breath catch. She knew he wasn't just speaking for her. He was opening a wound of his own. "What did you do?" she asked softly. He gave a small, almost bittersweet smile. "I reminded myself of one truth, that respect built from kindness and resilience can't be erased by doubt. And I surrounded myself with people who saw me, the real me, even when the world didn't." His eyes lingered on hers. "That's what I want to be for you." Her chest tightened, torn between fear and hope. "But what if I'm not enough for them anymore?" Keanu reached across the table, his hand finding hers. His grip was gentle, steady, unshakable. "Then prove to yourself you're enough first. When you believe it, the world will have no choice but to see it too." For a moment, his words seemed to ease the storm inside her. But just as she began to breathe, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, her hand trembled so badly she almost dropped it. She opened the text, her face paling. "They've moved the meeting up. They want me at the studio in an hour." Panic filled her eyes. "I can't face them like this. I'm not ready." Keanu squeezed her hand firmly. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. And I'll be right beside you. If they doubt you, let them see who you truly are. Let them see the Sandra who never stops fighting, who never stops caring." She wanted to argue, to tell him that his faith was too heavy for her to carry, but something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't blind hope, it was belief. Belief born from seeing her at her lowest and still calling her strong. She stood slowly, her knees weak. "Then let's go," she said, though her voice trembled. Keanu rose too, his calm presence steadying her. He took her coat from the rack, helping her slip it on. When their eyes met again, she felt a flicker of strength return. Fragile, but real. Together, they stepped outside. The storm had left the streets wet and shining, puddles reflecting the dull morning light. Sandra paused at the doorway, her chest tight, but Keanu's quiet nod urged her forward. The drive to the studio felt longer than it was. Sandra sat in the back seat, her hands clasped tightly together, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Every mile closer made her feel smaller, as though the weight of judgment already pressed on her shoulders. Keanu sat beside her, quiet but steady, his presence like an anchor in the storm of her thoughts. When they arrived, the building looked cold and unwelcoming. The tall glass doors reflected her nervous face back at her. Sandra froze for a moment on the steps, her breath catching. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his eyes calm but firm. "You don't have to be fearless, Sandra. You just have to be real. Let them see you. Not the version they think you should be, but the woman who has fought through storms and still stands." His words lit a small spark inside her. Not enough to burn away the fear, but enough to take the first step through those glass doors. Inside, the air felt tense. Assistants rushed around, their whispers quick and sharp. She caught fragments, her name, the word unreliable, doubts spoken too easily. Each word cut deep, but she kept walking, Keanu at her side like a shield. They were led into a large conference room. 3 executives sat at the long table, their faces stern and unreadable. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, leaned forward as she entered. "Sandra," he began, his tone cold, "we've been concerned about your focus. The last few weeks have raised serious doubts. If you cannot assure us today that you're committed, we'll have no choice but to move in a different direction." The words landed heavy. Her throat felt dry, her voice trapped inside. She wanted to defend herself, but fear pressed hard against her chest. Then Keanu spoke, his tone respectful but strong. "With all due respect, she doesn't need to prove her worth to anyone. Her work speaks for itself. She has carried films, inspired millions, and stood resilient in an industry that constantly tries to break people down. If she looks tired, it's because she has been giving everything she has." The executives shifted uncomfortably. The tall man frowned. "And who are you to speak on her behalf?" Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "I'm someone who's seen the truth when the cameras aren't rolling. Someone who's watched her fight battles no one else sees. You may look at her as a role, a product, but I see her as a human being, and that humanity is what makes her extraordinary." The room fell silent. Sandra's heart pounded, her eyes filling with tears, not of fear this time, but of something deeper. Keanu's words had given her courage. She straightened her back, finally finding her voice. "He's right," she said, her tone trembling but clear. "I've been struggling, yes. I've been carrying more than I let on. But that doesn't mean I've lost my commitment. It means I've been human. And maybe the world needs more humanity in its stories. If you want perfection, maybe I'm not it. But if you want honesty, if you want someone who will give her soul to this work, then I am still the right choice." The executives exchanged glances, their stern faces softening slightly. After a tense pause, the tall man leaned back in his chair. "Very well," he said slowly. "You'll have another chance. but it will be your last." The decision wasn't a full victory, but it was a lifeline. Sandra's chest loosened, her breath finally flowing free. As they left the building, the sky had started to clear. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, reflecting on the wet streets. Sandra stopped on the steps outside, turning to Keanu. "You didn't have to speak for me," she said softly. He gave a small smile. "I didn't. I just reminded you of what you already are." Her heart swelled with emotion, both fragile and fierce. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as an actress, not as someone to be judged, but as herself. The afternoon stretched into evening, but the weight of the morning still lingered in Sandra's chest. She and Keanu had left the studio hours ago, yet her thoughts replayed every moment of that meeting. The harsh words, the threat of losing everything, and then his voice cutting through like a shield. Without him, she might have broken. With him, she had stood. Back at her home, the silence was softer this time. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and the streets shining with reflected light. Sandra sat on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, watching the soft glow of lamps fill the room. Keanu sat across from her again, his presence calm, as if he knew she needed space to untangle her emotions. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what would have happened today if you weren't there." His eyes held hers, steady and kind. "You would have spoken for yourself. Maybe not in the same way, but you would have found the strength. It's already inside you, Sandra." She shook her head gently, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You always believe that, even when I don't. Sometimes I wonder why." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I've seen you fight when no one was watching. I've seen you stand tall even when you were breaking inside. That kind of strength isn't pretend. It's real. And it deserves to be believed in." His words pierced through the walls she had built around herself. She wiped at her face quickly, embarrassed by the tears. "You talk like I'm stronger than I feel." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "That's the thing about strength. We never feel it while we're carrying it, but others see it shining through." The room grew quiet again, but this time it was warm, not heavy. Sandra felt her chest loosen just enough to breathe without fear. Then, almost without thinking, she asked, "Why did you really come last night? Not just because of the rain. Not just because of guilt. What made you walk through that storm and knock on my door?" Keanu's face shifted, his calm eyes revealing something deeper, something he had been holding back. He hesitated, as if searching for the right words, then spoke softly. "Because I was tired of silence. Because I missed you. And because somewhere inside, I knew you were sitting in that quiet house, trying to be strong when all you needed was someone to sit with you. I couldn't let you face that storm alone." Her heart ached at the honesty in his voice. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from being seen, from being valued in a way that no stage or screen could ever offer. She moved slightly closer, her voice trembling. "Keanu, do you ever get tired of always being the one who carries others? Don't you ever want someone to carry you too?" He looked at her then, his expression open and vulnerable. "I do, more than I admit. But maybe that's why I came. Because with you, I don't feel like I have to carry the world. With you, I can just be me." Her breath caught. The truth of his words struck deep, shattering the last of the distance between them. Slowly, she reached out, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, warm and steady. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic promises, just two people sitting together, stripped of everything but honesty. Outside, the last drops of rain fell from the trees, the world finally calm after the storm. Inside, another storm was softening, one made of fear, loneliness, and doubt. It was being replaced by something fragile but beautiful. Trust. The city lights glowed faintly through the damp night as Sandra sat on the couch, her hand still clasped with Keanu's. Hours had passed since they had returned from the studio, but neither seemed eager to break the quiet between them. The silence was not empty anymore. It carried a weight, a softness, an unspoken promise. Sandra leaned back, her head resting against the cushion, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I keep thinking about everything that almost fell apart. If you hadn't come, if I had faced them alone, maybe I wouldn't even have a career left right now." Keanu shook his head gently, his voice calm but certain. "Don't give me all the credit. You stood in front of them and spoke your truth. I didn't put that courage in you, it was already there. All I did was remind you it existed." Her eyes filled with tears at the simplicity of his faith. "You always see something in me I can't see in myself, and that scares me sometimes. Because what if I fail? What if I let you down too?" His hand tightened around hers, firm and steady. "You could never let me down, Sandra, because you've already shown me more strength than most people ever will. You've taught me that being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. It means being real, and that's what makes you extraordinary." Her chest ached with emotion, but it was no longer the ache of loneliness. It was the ache of finally being seen, of finally being safe. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "I don't want this to fade. I don't want it to be just one night, just one storm. I want to believe you'll stay." For a long moment he held her gaze, his expression open, raw, and filled with truth. "Then believe it," he said softly. "Because I'm not leaving. Not now, not when you finally let me in." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it was joined by a small, trembling smile. She leaned against him, her head finding its place on his shoulder. Keanu wrapped his arm gently around her, holding her with a quiet strength that made her feel lighter than she had in years. Outside, the storm was long gone, leaving behind a stillness that carried the smell of fresh rain. The world felt new, washed clean. In that moment, Sandra realized something she hadn't dared to admit even to herself. Her battles weren't over. The studio still doubted her. The world would still test her, and storms would still come. But she no longer feared them, because she no longer faced them alone. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of Keanu's breath, her own heart finally calming against his. The storms outside had poured with fury, but the storm inside her had finally found peace.